Well, hello, folks out there in YouTube land. Got a very interesting show set up for you. Yep, the settlement seems to be incoming. It looks like things are going to get squared away with the ACC, FSU, and Clemson, most likely. And this story is everywhere. It says the ACC nearing agreement with Clemson FSU to stop the lawsuits. And currently there's 4 lawsuits going on in multiple states. FSU and Clemson suing the ACC. They were trying to get out of the grant of rights and trying to figure out a way to offset the shortcomings of the ACC and being stuck in that conference while the SEC and the Big Ten are doing this. And a lot of this stemmed from them getting creaked out of the playoff 2 years ago when FSU went undefeated, 13-0, won their conference and all that, and got kicked out of the Final Four because they had lost their quarterback, and 2 teams got put in front of them that had 1 loss. So that didn't sit well with FSU.
That's not fair!
Don't raise your voice to me.
And actually, had Jim Phillips allowed the 12-team playoff to go forward like it was supposed to in 2023, obviously Florida State would have been in, and none of this would have mattered. But he and 2 other conference commissioners decided to put a stop to that because it didn't feel like it was the right time. How'd that work out for you, Jim?
Oh, who won that fight anyway?
Anyway, a big part of this is a new revenue structure. The way they're going to set this up, it's going to have to do with teams that have higher television ratings and viewership in football and basketball will be a big part of this, and it's a 5-year rolling average of Nielsen ratings. And obviously, FSU and Clemson believe they'll be a big part of that. And the way this is set up, it looks like the top of the conference as far as viewership is going to probably make somewhere in the neighborhood of an extra $15 million. That's still not the $30 million they need to keep up with the SEC and Big Ten, but hey, it's halfway there, and it's $15 million better than where they were. And it can be even more than that if they play really well, get into the 12-team playoff, and win a game or 2. That could even go higher, probably over $20 million. So it is possible for them to offset a lot of those big losses that they're going to be dealing with. And you know, as a football fan, if FSU is on or Clemson's on, there's a good chance you're going to watch. I know I will. If there are other teams in the ACC that are playing, you know, Wake Forest or Stanford maybe, or just whoever, you're not going to watch that game. And you know, I'll watch the Miami Hurricanes right now because they've gotten good over the last year or 2. But here's the one thing that's odd about the ACC, and this is why I think FSU and Clemson wanted out. Whenever they have a game, their stadium's full. You know, FSU fills up their stadium, no problem. Clemson does too. I was watching Miami last year against Duke, and Duke was a good team. And Miami was in first place in the ACC. It was a big ball game, and it was at Miami. And there were about 30,000 people in the stands. And it shocked me. I had just forgotten or maybe didn't realize just the lack of support for some of the teams in the ACC. I mean, you're in first place in the conference and you draw 30,000. Imagine Tennessee being in first place in the SEC and Auburn shows up and they're, 6-2. You couldn't get a ticket into Neyland Stadium. It'd be 100,000 packed with 20,000 more people trying to get a ticket. But Miami, 30,000. I mean, it blew my mind. There were just huge gaps everywhere in the stadium. So I can understand why the TV rights money's not high, because there's just not enough interest in some of those teams. Now, Miami's a good team. They're spending the money in the NIL, but their support they're getting there at Miami is very surprising to me, and that's not abnormal in the ACC and some of these other conferences. Like the Big 12's got some of those problems too. You'll never see that in the SEC. And most of the Big Ten, they've got good, they draw well too. But anyway, that blew my mind last year. And it says the initiatives are, of course, they're available to all the programs, but we know who's going to draw. And here it talks about the Success Initiative, where it will distribute more revenue to teams that excel in football and basketball. It says high-performing football programs as much as $25 million if all success benchmarks are met. Qualify for a bowl game, finish inside the top 25, advance through the college football playoff, etc. And the reason they're doing this, and it talks about this here, the gaps in television distribution, at the heart of these lawsuits could soar to more than $30 million per school within the next 2 years between the SEC and the ACC. So you can see why FSU is so upset. The other part of this lawsuit is they want to know how much the penalty is going to be to leave early. Because realize this TV contract runs till 2036, which is crazy how long this, and it was an extension that ESPN had solely. The ACC teams had no say. It was signed years ago, and they got a option to extend all the way to 2036. So it's just maybe back then it didn't seem like such a bad deal, but right now it looks horrible. So they want to know, what would it cost us to leave? Well, the way they had it set up and the way it was written was not only do you have to pay $120 million, you also lose your TV rights until 2036. So even if you pay to get out, they still own you. They still own your rights. So it doesn't do you any good, which I don't know if that could be legal. What's the point of leaving if they still own your rights? And that, I believe, is why the ACC is willing to settle, because if this gets turned over in the courts, it could be a nightmare for the ACC. So yeah, the ACC is willing to go along with this because there is that possibility of the whole thing getting blown up, which makes some sense. Plus, this is costing a lot of money. Both these schools and the ACC are spending money in multiple states trying to get this worked out, and it's expensive. And the ACC does not have unlimited money, nor do the other two schools. So there's, motivation to settle this.
Settle! Settle, 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 settle!
And they're trying to come up with a price of how much it would cost to leave early, because I'm sure Clemson and also I know FSU would like to get out, but in somewhere in the neighborhood of 2030 or 31, so they could join either the Big Ten or SEC when their contract comes due. Because the Big Ten's contract, their TV rights end in 31. Let me check that. Yeah, it's 2030. The Big Ten's ends. And so I would say FSU is probably sitting there thinking, 2031 might be the time for us to join another conference if it's available. And my understanding, based on what we're hearing, is that the penalty would be under $100 million. And realize the further you go towards 2036, the less value that's going to have, because come 2036, the ACC can forget FSU and Clemson. They'll be as gone can be. So they're probably thinking, well, $100 million or $80 or $90 million is better than nothing in 2036. So there's probably some of that thinking as well. And here it talks about the major shift that's going to probably happen between the years of 2030 and 32. And it talks about all the events that could trigger sweeping changes in a college sports landscape. And we saw that with the Pac-12 dissolving, and all of that happened fast. You had Oklahoma and Texas join the SEC, which kind of really put a whack into the Big 12. And then the Pac-12, all hell broke loose. You had Oregon and Washington and USC move into the Big Ten, and the Pac-12 just dissolved. And now you've still got a couple of teams out there in on the island of misfit toys. I think it's Washington State and then maybe Oregon State. Anyway, when these things happen, they happen fast. And so that 2030 is a very important date. So I would assume there'll be some trigger point there, and how much money FSU could pay to get out. Because if you think about it, even if you're getting $15 or $20 million more in the ACC than you were, by the time they do this new Big Ten deal, and then the SEC does theirs in 2033, you're going to be more than $30 million behind. You're probably going to be 50. So you might sit there and go, well, yeah, if I got to pay 80 or 90 million to get out of the ACC, but over that 4 or 5 years, I could make that up if I join the Big Ten. That's the possibility. And what they really want is long-term stability. FSU wants to be with the big dogs and not in the ACC long-term, because they don't want to continue to get further and further behind, because football's super important at FSU and super important at Clemson. And they know they're getting left behind. And most of the schools in the ACC, they like football, but it's not the end of the world for them one way or the other. I can tell you Wake Forest isn't sitting there worrying and fretting about whether or not they're in the ACC or not. And that goes for a lot of teams out there. It's just, look, some schools, football means the world, and some it's not. So Anyway, it does look like something's going to give on this. It sounds like they're meeting Tuesday to vote on this, and it'll probably get settled in the next week or two as far as an agreement between the two entities, and then however long it takes for the judges to okay it. Usually that shouldn't be too difficult, because if you've got two parties that are suing and they settle, I mean, it's kind of over with. So anyway, look for some big changes coming, and this is all over the news right now. So I think it's good for both teams. It's good for the conference, ACC. It's good for those two teams. It gives them some sort of understanding of what's going to happen. They're being rewarded for the viewership that they get, which is well above a lot of the other teams in the ACC, which is fair. And it gives them some sort of an exit strategy if they, who knows, maybe this will work out good for them. They stay in the ACC. It gives the ACC a chance to survive as well, because that's their big concern. They don't want to turn into the Pac-12. Anyway, if you like this content, be sure to hit that like button. Let's me continue to cover all these big college sports stories. If you've not subscribed, boom, 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 hit this little button right here. Help you get my videos. Won't cost you a dime. And right over here's the most recent video YouTube thinks you'll enjoy. We'll see you next time on Sports Talk Jay.
Well, come to see a fat old man sometime. Yeah!